Well, it's morning here, but it's afternoon there, I guess.
It's 4:25 here at the moment, and I'm just having my afternoon tea.
Well, I'm on the orange juice, so welcome. So, launching in with the first question. When did you first discover steampunk and what drew you to it?
That's a question everyone asks, isn't it? Okay, it is actually not a short story.
That's okay.
Okay, so I've always been a big fan of science fiction. When I was 4, apparently, my dad used to sit me in front of the TV to watch Doctor Who. And of course, Doctor Who always has that clunky sort of steampunky feel, so I reckon that probably started there a bit. Apparently, I was also the same year sat in front of the TV to watch the moon landing, so there you go. So there's a bit of sciencey stuff in there as well. I've read a lot of science fiction, including Victorian classics, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, which is sort of not quite steampunk in the thing. I enjoyed Star Wars and Star Trek, but I was never really quite comfortable with the Swish technology. It was all too sleek and all too perfect, if you know what I mean. I was a D&D player, so the history bits are in there. It sort of pushed me a little bit further away from the shiny, perfect Star Trek future as well. School, okay, at school I did physics, art and English were actually my best subjects, which isn't a normal combination, apparently. Then I did uni, did a Bachelor of Applied Science, so I was, it's the old, you can't do arts, it's not a real job, to get a real job. Yeah, so I did, science was there sort of for about 28 years, and I did historical costuming for about 20 years. So the costumes and the fashion were part of it as well. And sort of all that accumulated to in the mid 2000s when those movies were starting to come out. Those movies starting to come out? Yeah. And about that time was when I was looking for a new costuming challenge as well, because I used to do mid-16th century Florentine clothing, and I'd actually gone to Florence and studied, went to a different costume colloquium, and it was actually my hand sewing all these costumes, and I got to that certain point where I was looking for a different challenge, and sort of I'd always found the Victoria era fascinating. While it could be dark, it was a time of change when people were going from superstition to more science, and there was a whole feeling of whimsy and wonder and awe and wow, life is just amazing. But they still had that artistic feel. They hadn't gone away from that. You had the creative arts happening at the same time. So again, it was mixing the art and the science, which is what I like to do. You can see where I'm going, can't you?
Yep.
So then there's the punk, the steampunk. So like science fiction before it, or with it still, it can examine society, shine a light on its failings as well as the good parts of it. So you've got the awe and the fantastic, but you've also got racism and patriarchal society. And from that, we can learn from our mistakes, recreate a better world, I suppose you'd say, and add in that sense of wonder. So people these days are sort of down and a bit jaded, whereas it's that whole, that sort of, I suppose, so combining the Victorian aesthetic and the cool costumes with the science and the whimsy and the imagination of the creative side. So does that answer the question?
It doesn't. So I think what that says is you grew up and grew into it because it needed to be done.
And it wasn't really until I saw those movies and stuff when it started, and you're going, oh, that's my tribe.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what it was. So I suppose I grew into it eventually, not knowing what it was for a long time.
Sure. It's not uncommon. Lots of people have similar experiences in my talking to people. So that really negates my second question, Because my second question was that I grew up surrounded by Victorian architecture and history, Bill's 60s movies and Verne and Wells. And do you think your childhood informs your love of steampunk? Yes.
Yes, but it's really weird though, because I actually looked at that question and I went, well, I actually grew up on a goat dairy farm.
Right.
How much further can you get from, that sort of science fiction-y type background? So, as I mentioned before about Doctor Who, so my earliest memories are milking goats, Doctor Who, and spaceships on the moon. So it's a really weird sort of combination. We moved to Brisbane in the mid-70s, I think. And at that time, I was there still in the 80s. I went to university in the 80s there. And in 1982, that was what I remember about Brisbane is that there was this era of all the old buildings just being torn down literally overnight. It was a government-approved vandalism, as far as I'm concerned, of the history. And so the destruction of history is a strong memory as well from my younger days. So we don't have as long a history of colonial or European settlement here as you have, but we've also got this other, I'll talk a bit later about this other history of our Indigenous peoples. I'll talk about that later, it fits better in the question. So, again, I talked about my school, and I actually got to go to the summer science school at Griffith Union 1980, and that sort of science, so yeah.
Yeah,
it sort of did answer the question, really, didn't it?
It did. In that you have answered it. In that the influences that you refer back to, saying that got you into steampunk in the mid 2000s, really started from everything from science fiction, and it's just snowballed, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, when I left school, you know how in grade 12 they say, "What do you want to do when you leave school?" I wanted to be an astronaut, an archaeologist, a writer, an artist, a photographer, a cinematographer, like we were talking about before, a brain scientist, studying the brain, not actually doing surgery, and of course travel with Doctor Who. So, that was my things I wanted to do. And then of course in the 80s you found out that even in the 80s women really couldn't do half of those things, which was really pewy. So that sort of gave me to the punk bit of steampunk. I think that was the little kernel that set me off on that side of it.
Yeah, I can get that. Cool. So that's where you've come from, but where do you want to take your readers?
Well, right when I started doing all this, one of the things was there's not enough Australian science fiction. Not enough Australian in steampunk. So the initial stories I wrote were based in London, Jack the Ripper and all the tropes, illusionists and ancient Egypt and that sort of stuff, because that's where a lot of people see steampunk. It's sort of the home, I suppose you'd say, of that sort of genre. But I wanted to have less England-centric ones. So in the... Here we go. That one there, in the Department of Curiosities, we actually end up at the end in Australia. And the second book is going to be set mostly in Australia.
Great.
So that's one thing. Also, writing is very cathartic with me with my PTSD and anxiety. And I've always been interested about, what makes the little grey cells work type thing. So I will be investigating what makes the bad guy tick a lot more, psychology of why. I'll be continuing with equality for women. My stories tend to have female protagonists, except for Dr. Jack, but he's a bad guy, so, women of a certain age, once you're over 40, you're considered invisible, particularly if you're a little bit plump, like I am. So not steampunk, but my Auntie Enid series has a older lady, I mean, most past cultures, even though it was patriarchal society, you still have old wives' tales, and you have the nonna who rules the family type thing. But these days, it's just like, unless you're famous like Helen Mirren or someone, they just totally ignore you. So putting more females in, and older females, environmental things, bees. There's a thing about bees in my books as well. I'm also, my father there's always a mystery about my father's side of the family. Apparently he has Indigenous roots in Canada. So he's at least possibly part nation, First Nation. And so I've always had a connection there, and I want to learn more about that. So particularly the Black Lives Matter thing has really been on topic for what I've been thinking about for a while. And I'd like in so I've got the second book of start again. Okay, I've got the second book of Department of Curiosities, which is going to be the next book after the one I'm currently writing. And I have always wanted to put an Indigenous character in there because Australia particularly has some really interesting history. I'm so fortunate to be living in a country where our First Nation is the longest surviving culture in the world. It is amazing. They have just found evidence recently that it's the oldest recorded culture to bake bread. It's something like tens of thousands of years ago, before anywhere else. They have worked land with agriculture, which they're realising from things that Cook wrote when he was here. If they look at it in more detail, they actually had agriculture, because of course they always said no, they didn't, but they do. And they actually excel at astronomy and engineering. I've just been doing, there's an online thing for Science Week, which is this week, talking about Indigenous astronomy, and it's quite fascinating. And we have this amazing thing, and I would like to put a character in there, because all too often history gets whitewashed. We had, when women got the vote here, which is the second place right behind New Zealand for women to get the vote, Indigenous women could actually have the vote as well, until 1901, when Federation happened, and then they lost that because they had to make all the states the same, and that really annoys me. So I actually had planned to talk to some of the local elders, but of course with lockdown it's going to take a bit longer. So, but that's one thing, is I have a thing about that. I did a short story a while ago that's in the Den of Antiquity anthology, and that one actually was set after the gold rush in South Australia had waned. A lot of the men just left their wives and they went to Victoria to the gold rush there, and never sent any money home. Happened all too often. And so I have a story in there called All the Glitters, and it's got Alice and Sue Lynn, and after Sue Lynn's husband left, it follows their trials and tribulations, I suppose, of trying to keep a mind going and living here without help. So, yeah, I know I've got on, haven't I? It's one of my little things they get.
That's all right.
Yeah, so soapbox.
There is one thing about steampunk that makes it special for me, and that's the fact that people are passionate. And passion in storytelling and narrative, but also passionate in where they're coming from and emotions. And we often get called a really inclusive society, a welcoming society. And so I think that's because we let people get passionate.
That's one of the things I probably stay for in steampunk is, in general, there's an openness and acceptance of people, whether people of colour, LGBTIQA, disabilities, people with physical or mental health issues. It tends to be, in general, except for a few, and in general, it's a very accepting group of people, and that's what probably keeps me here as well. I feel like I'm accepted.
Great, that was great. Let's move on. So, next question. If we're to learn anything from the pandemic, to me, one of the things I'm taking from it is that technology has meant that we can have conversations like this across the other side of the world. We don't have to travel to places to be involved in things. However, we will be able to travel again, hopefully. Can you name one place that you would really love to go to? Just one.
Just one. Oh, Canada. Oh, I got four. Okay, one. Scotland. I've got my mum's side, my grandma's side comes from Scotland. Um, and we were going to go visit Scotland in 2000, but we got there and there was that big petrol strike. You remember that? We got stuck in London and then had to go over to Canada early. So I want to go back to Canada too and check out my dad's roots. But yeah,
Both cool places.
I do want to get to Lincoln Asylum, and I've got lots of research to do in the UK as well. So,
what have you got planned? What have we got to look forward to from you in the next year first?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to finish my non-steampunk Aunt Enid mystery, which it's sort of steampunk adjacent. It has Arthur Conan Doyle and fairies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a cozy fantasy mystery. Then where's Holmes too? Okay, again, Sherlock Holmes. I did a story a couple of years ago which had Mrs. Hudson, and she was doing some investigating, and I've actually got accepted another Mrs. Hudson story to go into the Where's Home 2 anthology, which is a Queensland anthology, and you'll be able to buy it online, and that should be out at the end of the year around November. I've got a second follow-up shorter story for Dr. Jack, so Jack the Ripper, but he's complicated. And that's being considered for a Canadian anthology at the moment, so cross your fingers and wish me luck on that one. Then I can finally get on to my second Department of Curiosity. I'll put that back a bit because I need to do that, as I said, that research and talk to people. There's fantasy book series, third book of Department of Curiosities, more Aunt Enid, and a new series or two or three. I've got a long list of about 20 books in my head. Wizard of St. Giles, which is a third steampunk series in the same world that will span UK and Australia and probably involve some time travel.
You can't beat a bit of time travel.
Gotta do time travel.
Gotta have time travel.
Not too fan, I've gotta have time travel.
Right. Final question. Now, you've mentioned it here. You let slip PTSD, and you often post about mental health and personal experiences. Just give us a teeny insight into that without being too sort of personal.
Okay, so many of us have dealt with toxic workplaces and work stresses. Many things, and also things that happened in my childhood. Eventually in 2012, everything came to literally a crashing halt. And I ran into the doctor and I was freaking out, and I said I need a holiday because I hadn't been allowed to take a holiday for over a year because that was part of the work environment I was working in. And also it was a health related one. I was an optometrist, so people think, oh, optometrist, but there's a lot of responsibility. There's certain things which could mean someone could die, and that was all building up. And so I got diagnosed with workplace anxiety. By 2014, I actually was really forced to quit my 28-year career and then basically go to no job. But it wasn't until 5 years right from the beginning, so 2017, I was actually diagnosed with PTSD, and that's when, so 5 years it took to get to a point where I could start getting some significant headway. Of course, with COVID, there's a lot of people who they're isolated from friends and family. They don't know about their job, where their job's going, whether they're going to have a job. So I talk about mental health because a lot of people can't. And really we need to talk about it because with awareness comes education. With education comes acceptance and understanding. And really we can't do anything about that. I mean, 1 in 5 people are going to have some sort of mental health issue, whether it's small, large, or whatever. I'm actually doing September next month. I don't know whether you get that in the UK, but you can actually go to, can I do a website thing?
Yeah, sure. And I'll put the link on. www.liptember.com.au/Karen
Dash, I think, Carlisle, but yeah, we'll put it in the thingy. So you can actually, it raises, it's specifically to raise awareness for women's mental health, because there's men and women both suffer mental health, but it's different sort of triggers and different ways they do it. And of course, you've got Movember for the men's health, and I'm not quite up to the growing a mo yet. So yeah, so yeah, I think someone's got to talk about it, and I'm quite happy to lay it out. I've always been a person, too much information person, as you've gathered.
I wouldn't say that. It has, however, been a real pleasure talking to you. So thank you for joining us from far off distant Adelaide, and
South Australia.
hopefully we will see you at an asylum in the future. But in the meantime, let's continue doing stuff on Zoom and let's make the world smaller. Yeah?
Yes, I've actually been really busy since all this happened doing more Zoom, because for someone that gets problems with going out into the real world with lots of people, it's been a bit of a help, actually.
It's good stuff. So thank you very much. And from Sanctuary, see you soon. Bye.
See you, Louise.